Shadows Rising, Chapter 10, Nasmir. Apari lit the final stick of incense, wafting the fragrant smoke toward her face and breathing deep. Her lungs ached, but the pain was part of her ritual. The deep throb in her right leg was constant now. Nothing eased her suffering, but she let it fuel her, just as the blood of traitors would fuel her magic. Tayo swore she knew of Vulpera Sawbones talented enough to remove the leg cleanly at the knee, but Apari refused. Instead, she let it wither and grow mottled with dark blotches, a reminder that time was short, that not a single moment could be wasted. How much longer she could walk on it, she could not say. "Is everything ready?" Tayo's voice cut clearly through the winds whistling above Prisoner's Pass. The tar pits bubbling below stank, but the incense mellowed the reek. Apari struggled to her feet, ignoring the stubborn pain in her leg. No help came from Tayo, for she knew Apari would reject any assistance she offered. The followers of the Widow's Bite gathered around them in a loose circle, and they could not be allowed to witness their leader's weakness. "I stand ready," Apari told the taller troll, Tayo's hair painted as black as the tar pits. "Our assassination failed, Tayo. The Horde will come looking for answers. We attacked the Queen on their soil, but we cannot allow them on ours. Their numbers are too great, and they will overwhelm us and the Pale Rider before our justice is had." "The storm will keep them at bay, Apari. This magic is old as the Empire itself," Tayo assured her. "We will not fail. All is not lost." Apari snorted. "When the Pale Rider sees this, he will not doubt us again. He thinks he is powerful. He knows nothing of our real power. This will stop all his complaining and show the reach of the Widow's Bite." Then Apari gazed around at her assembled rebels. Their numbers grew each day, slowly but surely more of the Zandalari and Dazaralor and the surrounding villages leaving homes behind to join their ranks. News spread of their attack on the palace. Talanji had made an appearance in the marketplace afterward, quelling rumors that she had been killed in the assassination attempt, but many reported she looked unwell. If the Widow's Bite could threaten the Queen herself, then they were not just an upstart insurrection, but a true danger to the crown. They could not allow her to gather any allies to her side. Zandalar must be cut off, isolated, made vulnerable, so that it could be made again strong. "We all stand ready." Apari raised her arms, and the members of the Widow's Bite grew silent with awe. "It will take all of our power, all of our considerable might, to shake the seas and command the clouds." Before her, a nobleman from the palace lay on a flat, polished piece of black rock. He squirmed. Daz, Apari's dreadtick, perched on his chest, fangs chattering. The old troll, his eyes big and round as moons, had been tightly gagged, and his muffled protests were drowned by Apari's voice. They had taken his fine robes and jewels to trade with passing merchants for food and weapons. "Chant with me now, brothers and sisters. I need your voices. Let the heavens hear ya. Let your will be known." 30 or so trolls sat perched in that circle around Apari, their backs to the vultures circling over the pass. The moon flashed bright and red, drenched in blood as if it had predicated their purpose. Her followers wore loose black tunics and loincloths slashed with white stripes to mimic a spider's many legs. Some wore carved talismans, and others fearlessly allowed fat, furry tarantulas to crawl freely over their shoulders. The chanting began slowly, Apari conducting her followers with broad sweeps of her arms. Tayo walked the circle painted on the dark, flat stones, the narrow plateau above the pass serving as their ritual altar. Not far below, hewing closely to the rocks, they had made a temporary camp, pushed out of their swamp caves by increasingly paranoid royal patrols. She beheld her faithful followers, hungry, tired, hunted from one end of Zandalar to the other. Many had eaten only bone broth and paper-thin bat wings for days now. It did not matter. They would not stop. Their starved bellies made them wild and reckless, and that suited Apari just fine. The Pale Rider, Nathanos, would join them soon with his rangers to plan the final blow against Talanji and her cursed Loa, and then there would be no escape for the traitor queen. Even the seas would churn with the fury of the widow's bite. Apari limped to the old troll at the center of the white circle, while Tayo lit the 8 ritual torches. White flames blossomed like pale flowers, the acrid smoke mingling with the incense and the stink of sweat pouring off the noble. Apari paused, dagger at her side, wondering what the sacrifice must think of her. She knew him, knew his family, but that did not matter. Once, Apari had been just as rich and as noble, as beautiful as the old troll's young daughter, held to be even more desirable than Talanji herself. Her hair had spilled like a clear silver waterfall over one shoulder, braided intricately, pink flowers and beads winking out from between the strands. General Jacrezette had often praised her smooth green skin and slender arms. "Arms made for dancing," he would say, teasing her as she flitted down the palace halls. But those comments, those smooth, slender arms and flowery braids, felt like a cruel joke. Now she never washed that silver hair, her eyes hidden behind a half-mask. The wound in her leg festered and oozed, pungent with malodor. The infection was like nothing she or her physicians had seen, resistant to magic and to poultices. A wound more of the heart and mind than the body, some shaman told her to her face, as if she were the one responsible for its refusal to heal. Only months had passed since her world was shattered, her future stolen from her, and her body broken. But those had been the truest months, the months that defined her. No more frivolities, no more games. The widow's bite was her purpose now, her mother's legacy, her only concern. "You won't be needing this anymore," Apari said, kneeling with difficulty. She snatched the gag from the troll's mouth, and at once he began pleading. "You do not need to do this. Do you want gold? I can give you gold. Please, Pari, I know you. It is me, Bezime. You must know me. There's no need for all of this. I will give you whatever you want. My daughter is to be married soon. Let me live to see it." "Ah," Apari teased cruelly. "Ya gave your daughter away. Then this be a mercy. Keep your gold and your promises, sacrifice. But don't be stingy with your screams." Apari raised the ritual knife, and then brought it down with a true strike, piercing the heart, bringing forth the blood, the fuel. Magic had its cost.
"Avre, forgive me,"
His thin voice ebbed as his eyes rolled back, and the fuel for the storm began to run into the rivulets carved in the stone. The pain in her leg no longer bothered Apari, a surge like lightning throwing her to her feet. Those arms made for dancing were raised to the moon, and the thrilled cries of her followers felt as intoxicating as the blood magic. "By flowing, foaming blood, we call the sea to rise!" Apari thundered. Tayo lifted her torch, the flame hitting its zenith each time the crowd chanted, "Blood! Blood! Blood!" The blood racing toward the painted symbol ignited, crackling, then the ground all around Apari's feet began to hum and glow. "By wind from dead lungs, we call the clouds to seethe! Wind! 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 Blood be fire! Fire burn bright! Light the skies and show us your might!" Apari closed her hands into fists, the white flames rising around her, traveling from the runnels in the stone to the white painted symbol and back to the sacrifice at the center of it all. Her clothes caught fire first, curling. Tayo held her torch high, and the chanting became erratic, her followers leaping and dancing, laughing and twirling one another as the flames abruptly snuffed themselves out. The wind died down. All was quiet until the fire burned anew, now in Apari's hands. A distant rumble to the east announced their success. Soon the skies above the Zandalari coast would thicken with black clouds, the waves below towering taller than ships. Apari brought her palms together, smothering the magic until it hissed and dulled. And for a moment, with that power still rolling through her veins and her followers celebrating, she knew happiness. The body before her, charred and still, was nothing now but a gift for the buzzards. Tayo brought her torch and a smile to Apari, putting her free hand on the troll's shoulders. Hers was a more reserved jubilation. "Yasma would be proud." Nodding, Apari watched her dread tick pace listlessly next to the still smoldering body. "I know." Sighing, she clucked her tongue, and the tick buzzed up into the air, then flew a crooked path to her shoulder, landing there with a nip at her ear. "Patience, little one. Don't be sad now. When the traitors lie dead at our feet, you will have your feast." Chapter 11. Arathi Highlands. "Illyria! Terrellian! Have you found anything?" The whistling vortex of the portal twisted shut behind her, and Jaina Proudmoore stepped out onto the sand, salt, and spray greeting her. She had come with all haste, sent by the King of Stormwind, Terrellian and Illyria's lack of progress concerning him. Days had passed with no word from the pair, no indication that the tip sending them to the Highlands had borne fruit. Jaina had tried to counsel him towards patience, but none of her assurances, none of her arguments, eased his troubled heart. A human man, sprawled on the ground, shook helplessly as a dark, shadowy cloud enveloped his head, golden shackles holding him against his will. Terrellian was the first to turn and face her, the paladin's concentration breaking, the glittering chains pressing the man into the sand, vanishing in a puff of light. Proudmoore knew that some wielded the light and void seamlessly, but she had never seen such methods used as coercion. Horrible, she thought. What has possessed them? Perhaps Anduin was wise to send her after all. "This man and his family sheltered one of the Banshee Queen's dark rangers, then smuggled her to a shipping boat," Terrellian told her. Illyria did not acknowledge her presence, apparently too busy drawing agonized screams from the smuggler to stop and answer Jaina. A small outpost had been built not far from the shore, and a smattering of aligned soldiers waited there, lingering in the doorway. Down the beach, a handful of void elves kept solemn watch over what appeared to be the rest of the smuggler's family, all of them on their knees, cowering. "And you know this how?" Jaina pressed, joining Terrelion and Illyria on the damp and shifting sand near the surf. "Did he resist?" "The father refused to answer our questions, but he possessed a suspicious dagger." And here Terrelion produced the blade, its handle finely wrought with a raised silver skull, purple gems glittering along the hilt. "A dagger that would look more fitting in a forsaken scabbard, don't you agree?" Jaina took hold of their evidence, examining it closely. She could not deny that it resembled the weapons used by Sylvanas and her chosen guards. "A group of refugees led us here. Their apothecary treated the ranger for wounds, and then she left for the coast. Vizrin is the ranger. Do you know her?" Terrelion asked. A cutting wind streaming up from the south bit at Jaina's skin, fluttering her blue and gold cloak. It might have given her a chill, but she already shivered, mistrustful of the void, disgusted by what she now watched Illyria do to the smuggler. Many looked on, including Terrelion's alliance forces. Some even squirmed, seemingly sharing Jaina's discomfort. "I don't know her," Jaina replied, returning the blade. "That is no matter," he said with a shrug. "We will find her soon enough." The smuggler went silent and limp, perhaps dead, curled into a ball in the sand while the foamy waves lapped at his boots. Illyria inhaled deeply, her eyes lit with strange excitement as she at last ended her cruel work and turned to address them. "Yes, we will find her soon," Illyria nodded, satisfied. "They provided a skiff sturdy enough to sail deep water. The fool ranger was quite specific. It must get her west." Illyria glanced between Jaina and Terrelion. "The only thing worth sailing to directly west of here is the Zandalari coast." Jaina could not argue with the results of their use of both light and void, but she certainly could argue with the method. They seemed distant, numb, as if this was something they had reluctantly done before. Jaina was left hoping it was a desperate measure taken in response to limited time, not their new normal. And time was limited. Searching every corner of Azeroth remained a massive undertaking, and the longer they looked, the less likely they were to find Sylvanas before she caused more death and mayhem. "Does the king know you are employing these—" Jaina groped for a diplomatic word. "Tactics?" At last the poor man on the ground moved, his hand clawing listlessly at the wet sand. The wind carried the full-bodied sobs of his wife and son toward them. "The king was quite clear," Illyria answered. "We were to use whatever means necessary to extract information. Now we know Sylvanas has her sights set on Zandalar. Our scope has narrowed, and I can only imagine King Anduin will be pleased." "If this is how we must behave to achieve victory, then he is not pleased," Jaina assured them in a hiss, gesturing to the broken smuggler. "Nor am I." "I assure you, all will make sense in time, Jaina." Terrelion spoke before Illyria could spit out whatever she had ready, though the void-touched elf's face froze on a snarl. "Illyria did not harm him overmuch, and the light will soothe whatever now ails him. I will see to that. I would never let the void within her rage out of control." "And I would never need him to control me." "Indeed." Jaina pushed past them both. kneeling beside the trembling smuggler. Carefully, she rolled him onto his back, cradling his head with one hand, her eye seeking along his face for any hint of recognition. "He has told me everything," Illyria continued impatiently. "To dawdle here with him is to waste precious time." "I'm sorry." The words dribbled out between thin, bluish lips, as if Illyria had stolen the last trace of warmth from his body. "My family, I couldn't feed them. Storms have kept the fish away." "And a dagger that fine would fetch a tempting price," Jaina finished for him. "When it comes to those we love, we always do what we must. Your honesty is your penance, sir, so I tell you now, if you have anything more to say—" Illyria sighed, but the smuggler in Jaina's grasp pawed at the air, nodding frantically. The ranger, she must reach her destination before the White Lady is full," the man whimpered, his eyes rolling back. "After, no ships will pass." "What did he say?" Terrelion demanded, his heavy boots making sand fly as he hurried to join them. "What did he say about the sea?" Jaina frowned, gently placing the man's head back on the unforgiving pillow of the shore. No ships will pass. It was compassion and not torture that produced the final warning. Perhaps the man might have told them all he knew willingly, if only a bit more patience had been utilized. "When is the next full moon?" Taken aback, Terrelion whispered something under his breath, frowning as he made the quick calculations. 6 days. Careful not to disturb the smuggler further, Jaina stood and marched back to Illyria, who had crossed both arms across her chest, watching the mage with naked suspicion, one feathery eyebrow cocked. Her lips pulled into a crooked smile. "We have but 6 days to reach Zandalar safely," Jaina repeated. "I will return to Stormwind at once, and relay all of this to the king." Not missing the subtle emphasis she placed on all of this, Illyria shifted to her right, standing exactly where Jaina had meant to place her portal. The two women locked eyes, and Jaina felt a chill prickle in her palms, a warning from her own instincts that if she did not leave soon, they might descend into a true argument. "Is this truly our highest priority, Jaina?" Illyria whispered, mindful of the soldiers observing them. "Tattling?" Jaina tossed back her long braid of hair and conjured her portal, summoning it uncomfortably near to Illyria's back. "All will make sense in time, Illyria," she said, using Terrelion's own condescending placation. "I go only to apprise King Anduin of your progress, and to tattle." Jaina waited until the elf stepped aside, allowing her to stride quickly toward the portal. She did not trust the void, and she could not trust anyone practically possessed by it. Anduin couldn't possibly know the extent of what Illyria and Terrelion were doing in his name, and he would never condone it. They were setting a dangerous precedent. She returned to Stormwind City with all possible haste, though her thoughts only grew darker along the way. How could they justify abusing light and void together in such a way? A paladin of Terrelion's experience and wisdom ought to know better. Illyria ought to know better too, and yet, through their strange alchemy of light and shadow, they had found the most usable information thus far in the campaign to hunt down Sylvanas. When she arrived in the city, her priority remained Anduin. Jaina stormed into the throne room of Stormwind Keep, finding the king was not there to hear petitions. 2 armored sentinels in blue and gold livery near the throne directed her to the map room. Jaina Proudmoore was, after all, a fixture in the castle, both friend and advisor to the young king. Her cloak billowed behind her as she skirted around the ever-present crush of nobles, soldiers, and visitors filling the throne room. She was not at all surprised to find Anduin hunched over the immense yellowed map of Azeroth strewn with books and smaller charts, the king of Gilneas at his side. She was, however, loath to tell them both what she had witnessed, as Genn Greymane's temper flared readily, even more so since the armistice. But Anduin brightened at her appearance, his blue eyes twinkling with what seemed to her like much-needed hope. "Please," was his first word to her. She braced. "Please tell me you bring good news." Jaina produced her crystal-topped staff with a wave of her right hand, snatching it up deftly and pointing with its brass end to the sea separating the eastern kingdoms from the troll continent of Zandalar. "We have 6 days to catch a fishing boat headed for eastern Zandalar," she told them with clipped efficiency. The macabre fate of their smuggler source could wait. "When the full moon comes, the waters in that pass will become impossible to sail. A dark ranger called Vizrin told all of this to the smuggler that outfitted her with a ship." Anduin's eyes danced even brighter, and he slammed a joyful fist down on the map table. "At last! At last! We will summon Matthias Shaw. He will be the best choice to give chase. His sea legs are stronger after our long campaign in Kultiras." Greymane expressed his gruff agreement. "I have no objections, but should we not send a larger force?" "We cannot risk alerting the Horde to our presence there," Jaina replied. "Zandalar is under their protection. Our ships in the area would be one thing, but making landfall might be seen as an act of aggression." "Jaina is right. The armistice is too fragile, and we cannot survive another war right now. Precautions must be taken, and Matthias can be but a shadow when he desires." The king clapped Genn Greymane several times on the back. "Go, find him. With his cunning and a Tide Sage's magic, we may yet catch this Dark Ranger. We must pray for good fortune and haste." Greymane bowed to Jaina on his way out, leaving her with a hurried, "Lord Admiral?" She fiddled with the anchor chain dangling around her neck, picking her next words carefully while Anduin leaned excitedly over the map, nearly touching his nose to the great sea. Time to dash this brief lift in his spirits. "Anduin," she spoke softly, cautiously, wary of any prying ears and eyes that might be lingering outside the door. "I have concerns." "We all do. These are concerning times." Anduin almost laughed, but then he craned his head back, still half embracing the table. "Jaina, what is it? You look truly troubled." Jaina sighed through her nose. There was little point in stalling. He had to know what she had witnessed. For all the lion's strength Anduin possessed, he was also gifted with a compassionate heart, a rare combination in a leader, and so it pained her to speak ill of those he respected. "Illyria and Terrelion tortured that smuggler in front of me. She used the void to infiltrate his mind, while he held him prisoner with chains made from the light. It looked unspeakably painful." She rounded the table, searching his face. "My king, I worry that their tactics represent you poorly. Every one of us, every soldier is in service to your crown. We stand under your banner, and if their actions are sanctioned by your rule, what does that say about us?" Anduin did not speak for a long while. Though his smile diminished, he shook his head, turning away from her, pacing back and forth across the lush green carpet beneath her feet. Finally, he crossed to a large brazier in the corner, belching healthy flames. Flattening his hand, he passed it back and forth just above the reach of the fire. "What does it say?" he echoed. He sounded almost offended that she had to ask. "It says we will do whatever we must to bring murderers to justice. It says we will not forget those lost in war. It says We will not forget Teldrassil or Lordaeron. It says we will never forget the Mak'gora. It says that we will not forget the flames blazing over the veiled sea, or the fires reflected in the eyes of 1,000 mourning children." His hand closed into a fist. With every word his determination grew, rising and rising, a crescendo that nearly reached a shout. Then he glanced at her out of the corner of his eye, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "There was a time not so long ago when you were not above swinging the harsh hammer of retribution. I have not forgotten, Jaina. Have you?" "Oh, great lion, your heart is becoming steel." Hers had once done the same, hardened by the bomb that destroyed Theramore, and that rigidity had ruled her for a time. Not only her powers, but her heart and mind encased in frost. Vividly, sadly, she remembered telling Varian in no uncertain terms that the Horde must be utterly annihilated. It had taken a long time for her to thaw, and remnants of that icy anger still lingered, making her all the more able to detect it in others. She saw it then in Anduin, a grief like an all-encompassing cold. "Jaina?" he prompted her, but she felt no rush to answer him. Jaina held fast to her staff, the red light of the brazier burnishing Anduin's face. Silently she turned, regarded Azeroth spread before her on the table. How well a map represented lands, but how poorly it described the people, the little tiny things that truly made up a whole entire world. "I have not forgotten," Jaina murmured, eyes fixed on Zandalar. "But I also remember that your father once warned Vol'jin to uphold honor or be ended. I wish, more than anything, my king, to see your reign endure, and for it to be remembered fondly. And more than anything, for you to be remembered in the same breath as your father." "Difficult decisions have to be made, and I trust Turelion and Illyria to know where the line of decency is, and not to cross it." Jaina had thought the argument over, but Anduin stood firm, watching her intently. His gaze never wavered. "Would their statues preside over our city because they are without honor?" Jaina need only blink to feel as if she were standing in Thunderbluff again, flush with victory and the optimism that often came with it. After all, they had just managed to rescue Bane Bloodhoof from the dungeons below Orgrimmar, a nigh impossible feat, and yet they had done it. Thrall had not shared her optimism, wary of her desire for a temporary alliance. "What's different this time?" "We are." "People change," Jaina said heatedly. She rolled her shoulders back, proud of that change, proud of who she had become and who she believed him to be. Anduin considered her words, but withdrew further into the corner, holding out his hands to the brazier as if her words had somehow chilled him. The thick curtain of his yellow hair swung before his face, concealing his expression. "People do change, but I trust Illyria and Turelion, despite what misfortunes have befallen them. Stormwind would not exist without them. They are woven into the very fabric of our kingdom's tales." There would be no swaying him. That much had become clear. She turned to go, leaving him with one last murmured plea. "Clarity and time are the final editors of that story, Anduin. I would know." Chapter 12. Atal Graal. "What do you think of her? The bold Ava. Say it with me. The bold Ava. Has a certain ring, doesn't it?" Flynn Fairwind cackled, slapping the mainmast vigorously as he turned his chest to the wind and breathed a deep and serene, almost religious glow about his face. "Christened her myself. The old name was To be frank, rubbish. The prows. Can you believe it? I'm sorry. Pardon me, the prows? Matthias Shaw stared straight ahead, convinced that if he said nothing at all and ignored the sailor like a basilisk desperate for a glance, then Fairwind would be forced to cease his blathering. He was wrong. What even is a prows? Blimey, sounds like something you pick out of your teeth. No, it's much better this way. Can you believe I won her in a dice game? Who would be stupid enough to wager this gorgeous girl? You, Matthias said without thinking it through. Well, in for a copper, in for a gold. And you would be soused. Yes, yes, absolutely hammered. Fairwind dissolved into further ridiculous laughter, doubling over as he gallivanted up and down the deck. Well, well, well. You know me well, Shaw. Do a bit of digging before we came aboard. What does the dossier on me say, by the way? Devilishly handsome, irresistible in every conceivable way, crack sailor, deadly with a blunderbuss? The significantly less glamorous answers would have to wait. Crack! A fork of lightning, white as alabaster, split the horizon. A moment later, waves rocked the bold Arva so hard, Flynn wrapped an arm and a leg around the mast to stay upright. Sailors began their calls, whistles blew, clouds the color of slate gathered thick and threatening just a few miles from the bow. Shaw tumbled to the railing, an old break in his shin screwing up tight enough to squeal. They were in for one hell of a storm. We should have another day, Shaw spat between gritted teeth. Survival weather, Fairwind was sober enough to shout. Grigsby to the helm! Keep speed, my lads and ladies! Aim for the flats! Rig out the storm sails and watch the decks! Nobody overboard on my watch! Matthias didn't dare relinquish his grip on the rail. He had seen his share of storms while posted in Kultiris, and they had taught him that only the cautious and wary survived. Light, but he despised sailing. Give him a good old solid office tucked away behind a false bookcase, a roaring fire, and plenty of desk space, the only true creature comforts a spymaster required. His stomach churned, his jaw clacked, his entire body protesting the sudden lurch of the ship as a particularly nasty wave broke against the bow. Tides be kind, I hope they're quick enough. Fairwind slid to the railing beside him, his lately acquired parrot pet struggling to flap to his shoulder, tossed hither and yon by the oncoming storm. Honestly, this is very, very bad. If the storm sail isn't up soon, then we're all well and truly A wave knocked the words out of Fairwind's mouth, and both men found themselves shocked across the ship. Fairwind landing against the opposite railing with a pained grunt, while Matthias had far less luck, his fingernails scratching along boards as slick as ice before he bypassed the railing and slid right off the edge of the ship, nothing but churning water beneath him. He watched a gnome holding a sail line soar overhead, mouth open in a scream, the sound of it drowned out by the thunder of 20-foot waves. Before Matthias could make the steep fall into the sea below, Fairwind managed to clamp a hand around his wrist and began to pull, but his chest slamming into the side of the hull left him breathless and seeing stars. Matthias collected himself, scrambling with his free hand for some purchase on the seams in a hull, while Fairwind braced a foot on either side in the gap in the railing. Heaving and sweating, cursing as he at last found the leverage to hoist Matthias back aboard. "Below deck!" Fairwind shouted. "Now! You don't have the sea legs for this, and I'm entirely too drunk, see? Nobody overboard on my watch!" It was an undignified retreat to the stairs. The threat of another wave meant that crawling on all fours was the safest option. Matthias sprang to his feet the moment they reached the relative safety of the sheltered corridor leading below deck. Water washed across the boards at his feet, spilling down into the stairwell, though there seemed to be no signs yet of flooding. When Matthias had traveled down the stairs a ways, Fairwind grabbed a passing sailor. To Matthias, it seemed like chaos, yet every man and woman aboard went about their job diligently, even if it appeared as if they were all running in random directions. "The flats!" Fairwind shook the sailor by his coat. "The mist is thick, but Naylor up in the crow's nest spotted a gap. We're bringing her around and threading it. Then we should have a safe stretch heading north." It was a screamed conversation, but both men kept their calm. "And Melly?" The sailor grinned and nodded, sodden from head to foot. "Never seen speed like that in me life, Captain." He was referring to Melly Spaulding, one of the finest tide sages in Kultiris, transferred urgently from the Proudmoore fleet. At first, she didn't seem to fit in well with the crew, keeping to herself, a head taller than the average sailor aboard. But then Grigsby had produced a flute one night, and Melly had come out of her shell, beguiling them all with a run of shanties so beautiful it left almost everyone in tears. Her voice rang out as crisp and haunting as a gust whistling off the waning glacier. "Are we to survive this?" Matthias demanded, ducking out of the cramped stairwell and into the marginally taller corridor. He flattened himself against the wall to let a sailor pass. Fairwind jogged down the stairs to meet him, following as Matthias shouldered open the captain's cabin, the view from the windows nauseating as the ship crested a wave and barreled back down. "Oh, no, it's all fine, Shaw. Completely fine. We live for storms like this. Keeps us all on our toes." Fairwind gave a barking laugh, then wiped the salt water out of his ginger mustache. "Hard to find a crew this fit. Melly and Naylor will bring us through, you'll see." Predictably, he crossed to the well-stocked liquor cabinet in the corner, carefully fishing out a bottle while the ship tossed like an enraged shardhorn. "Just something to settle the gut," Fairwind assured him, tossing back a healthy gulp from the bottle. "I'm sure," Matthias sighed. "We should have had more time." Smacking his lips, Fairwind kept the bottle, ambling over to the windows and watching the furious crash of the waves. It made Matthias sick to even glance at it. "Maybe your source lied." "Maybe." Matthias rubbed at his stubbled chin. "Or maybe this is just the opening act, and the real show hasn't even begun." "I hadn't considered that." Fairwind clutched the bottle. "Well, if your source was right, then this is indeed just a taste. The seas were meant to be impassable, yes? And, ta-da! We have passed." His final word was punctuated with a crack, and then an ominous scattering of shrieks and voices, finished with a desperate pounding on the door. "I may have spoken too soon." "Enter!" Matthias roared. The sailor they had passed going below deck skidded into the cabin, his clothes just as wet but also, somehow, singed. "Fire!" Fairwind slammed down the bottle and rushed to the sailor. He was a short lad, hardly more than 20, with a pockmarked face and small but quick, moving blue eyes. "Fire, Swales? How can there be fire?" "Lightning, Captain, and never mind." Pushing him aside, the captain stumbled out into the corridor, and Matthias chased after him, curious to know just how a ship in the midst of a cataclysmic storm could also catch on fire. Lightning, obviously, but surely the waves would take care of any flames. Above deck, they found fires spreading from the charred mainmast to the barrels piled below it. They had come through the rain and the waves, leaving the ship damp but vulnerable. Matthias himself knew how much gunpowder and pitch waited aboard to ignite and blow them sky high. "Well, the fire was a surprise," Fairwind admitted, tucking a curled forefinger under his chin. Matthias might have warned him of the oncoming footsteps, but didn't, dodging as the woman batted Fairwind aside like a sack of feathers. Melly Spaulding slid across the foam-slicked decks, back to them as she dropped her head, raised her arms, and with her curious tide sage magic, brought water streaming up the sides of the hull before it cascaded gently across the deck. One by one, the fires went out, cheers erupting from the sailors as the bold Arva slowed, sailing smoothly out of the black and blue squall behind them. "Well done, Melly, well done!" Matthias didn't feel in the mood for celebration. He surveyed the damaged mast, the burned sails and smoking provisions, as well as the thickening storm growing like a cancer across the sound. They had passed into Zandalari waters, and he couldn't help but think that the storm had been specifically summoned to keep them out. Who possessed magic like that, and where would they find them? "Sir, a message for you, sir. Shark, a thing for you, sir." Swales again, this time wet, singed, and carrying a wind-up shark, gnome technology fit for passing covert messages even at sea, much trickier to spot than a carrier pigeon. "Is it always like this with you?" Fairwind chuckled, watching Matthias crack open the shark, revealing a bundle of tiny rolled notes. "These are fraught times," Matthias muttered. "I don't cease being spymaster simply because I'm on a boat." He trusted the seafaring sorts to see to the damaged parts of the ship, retreating back below deck to see what his spies had uncovered abroad. This was not the business one conducted in front of prying eyes, and while Anduin assured him that the entire crew had been carefully vetted, Matthias knew the operation had been put together hastily, not allowing much time for lengthy observation of the crew. "A bit paranoid, are we?" Fairwind had followed him and, not subtly, banging into every door and wall available with his drunken weaving. He was going to use up all the usable air if he kept sighing so much, so Matthias simply charged ahead into the cabin, desperate for a relatively stable chair and a long think. Taking the seat far, far away from the liquor cabinet, Matthias seated himself comfortably, tucked beneath the painted portrait of a one-eyed, four-toothed goblin. Bold Arva herself, the ship's namesake, one of Flynn Fairwind's goblin first mates, killed, allegedly, in a tragic harpooning accident. Matthias listened to the return of the familiar, mundane noise of the ship sailing at a relaxed pace, gulls crying outside the windows, and the waves forming an almost hypnotizing rhythm that one had to lean into or risk seasickness. Unrolling his messages, Matthias found that Fairwind was not put off. No, indeed, the pirate made himself comfortable, leaning back in a chair until the edge tapped the window pane, his boots kicked up casually on the table. "That from your girlfriend?" Matthias snorted. "Hardly. Intelligence reports from my agents within the Horde." "Ooh, very spicy," Fairwind giggled, nursing his beloved bottle again. Finally putting down the booze, Fairwind cleared his throat, reading the room. "Very paranoid." He regarded the pirate dryly above the first unrolled message. "Just because we signed an armistice with the Horde doesn't mean we aren't watching them. Only a fool mistakes peacetime for complacency." "So then, what's new with the Horde? Any betrayals a-brewin'?" Matthias skimmed the messages quickly. They were written in a code illegible to anyone not trained in his specific style of shorthand. Efficient and cautious. He hadn't been able to successfully embed enough agents to cover every single member of the new Horde Council, but had trusted them to choose their targets once they reached Orgrimmar. Narcilla Keensight, codename Lancer, had chosen to focus her attention on Lorthamar Theron. Lancer, an old Blood Elf contact from the Uncrowned, had no loyalties to the Horde or Alliance, but only to gold, which Matthias provided her regularly. Her intelligence always proved worth the price. With a captive audience, Matthias read aloud the message, speeding along. "Lorthamar spends his days at study, though I often observe him gazing listlessly at nothing, then scribbling something in the margin of his book. Reading. This was the way an agent marked down time when nothing of note occurred. Another 5 days of reading. Still reading. No progress. At last I managed to access one of his tomes when he left to dine. It appears he is either composing poetry or notes of a more intimate nature. Beside a passage about holy energy, he writes, My dusk lily bends more each day toward the sun. Fairwind broke into laughter. Dusk lily? I am confused. Confused, yet enchanted. Is there more? Not about the flower, sadly, but she does describe an incident at the Horde Council meeting with the Zendalari Queen. Something of real substance. An assassination attempt by a troll. So somebody within the Horde wishes harm against Queen Talanji. Matthias set the message aside, pleased that he had managed to have eyes on the assassination. Could explain the storms, Fairwind mused, running his finger idly in circles around the mouth of the liquor bottle. How so? Well, if someone wants the Queen dead, then maybe she put the whole continent on lockdown. Nobody in or out until they find the assassins. Matthias frowned. That is annoyingly reasonable. Oh, why thank you. This one is from a goblin contact, Krazit the Bishop. Fairwind spat out half his swig of booze. Krazit? The Krazit? I know Krazit! Spooky little fellow liked to gamble in Freehold. Called himself the Bishop, 'cause he would get 3 sheets and say, Oh, lads, I'm a bit slopped, but it just sounded like, I'm a bishop! Calmly, Matthias clacked his teeth together and forced himself not to kick the table out from under Fairwind's feet. Problematically, the pirate was right. That exact fact existed in Kraz's dossier.
They are the best couple. I am so pleased.
Oh, I miss that guy, Fairwind went on. Lost my old parrot Bong Bong to him in a card game. Always wondered what happened to that bird. Yes, well, Kraz thinks the assassination attempt really gummed things up for the Horde, Matthias informed him, scanning the message and translating it. The Queen left in a huff. They've sent their own spies after her, a troll shaman called Zakan. Interesting. They must not be as solidly loyal to the Horde as we thought. How did you get Krazit to turn and snitch for you, if I may ask? Fairwind smirked, derailing Matthias's thought. It had been so long ago he struggled to recall. Parrots. A weird amount of parrots. Shrugging, the pirate hugged the liquor to his chest. Hasn't changed a bit. Hang on. Isn't it a bit crass that they've sent a spy after that troll queen? She nearly died and now they don't trust her? Maybe she's in cahoots with Sylvanas, eh? That's what we're here to investigate, right? And if the Horde don't trust her, then maybe we're all on to the same thing. He really didn't have time to give an introductory espionage class or time to point out that we weren't on to anything, but Stormwind Intelligence was. But then again, given their situation, there was little to do but wait and strategize. The Horde might not be our friends, but they're not stupid. In my experience, a conspiracy is easy to spot once you know what to look for. They probably just sent a spy as a precaution. A smart one. There was a soft, nervous rapping at the door. Who wishes, yeah? Matthias glared at the pirate, but Fairwind was already grinning ear to ear, bouncing his boots gleefully on the table. The Tide Sage Melly poked her head in. Tall and sturdy, she had neatly braided her reddish-brown hair in a crown across her head. Points of sunburn reddened her dark skin. Beg your pardon, she murmured. There's another storm coming on. I wanted to talk to you about it, about this weather. It can't be random, and this is no magic I know of. It's like they know where we are. It's like they've sent these ragers just for us. Chapter 13. Nasmir. What a pit! Sierra Moonwarden sneered, pulling her foot up out of the mud and listening to the resounding squelch. A blessing that this post is only temporary. Beside her, Nathanos stood stock still, ignoring the visible cloud of flies gathering around his head. He often wore a subtle cologne to ward off the scent of being neither living nor dead. Many found the complete absence of scent unnerving. Sierra had only just grown accustomed to it herself. She did not handle the bugs as gracefully, batting at them while they gathered in ever-thickening swarms. "Where are they?" Sierra added, annoyed. "Patience, Warden, patience." She had little on a good day, even less when she was forced to stand knee-deep in rotting mud. The Frog Marsh, a strangely painful reminder of how undead she truly was. Here, life roared at her from every direction, from the damp trees draped with green curtains of moss, to the crabs clicking their way up and down the shore behind them, to the deafening chorus of frogs and insects robbing any chance of a peaceful thought. Life. It was everywhere there. Brash, audacious life. It probably smelled green. Not an inch of it went uncovered in vines or nests or pond scum. Through the trees ahead, a herd of river beasts snorted and huffed, the brass section of the teeming band of chittering, birdsong, and ribbits. It was, in a word, loathsome. "We'll be eaten alive," she huffed, swatting a dozen bugs before all the words had left her mouth. "There." Nathanos pointed to the same trees that concealed the river beasts. Long, dripping strands of moss made the beach feel claustrophobic. The 4 dark rangers spread about to stand watch, dutifully endure the stinging of bugs and stinking of the bog. "Do you see them?" he asked. Sierra squinted. "They move like shadows along the forest floor, and being shadows, they will continue being very useful to us." She marked movement among the tall roots jutting out from the base of the trees. Trolls, cleverly smeared in mud, crept toward them, nearly invisible in the jumble of bushes and fallen logs in the swamp. Sierra would not argue about their usefulness. They had already had to move the Banshee's whale out of deep water to avoid the deadly storms raging along the coasts. "They can come out of hiding," she snapped. "They called for this meeting." "I happen to agree." With a smirk, Nathanos whistled with his fingers in his mouth, alerting the Zandalari rebels that he had noticed their presence. They stood one by one, their leader among them, slowly making her way to the location with a pronounced limp. Sierra somewhat liked the witch, Apari, for they had both been betrayed by the one thing that had always defined their lives. For Sierra, it was her worship of the goddess Elune. For Apari, it was her loyalty to the Zandalari crown. For the seriousness of her injury, Apari navigated the swamp deftly. They met in a clearing not far from the sands, the Widow's Bite leader arriving with her bulbous tick pet on her shoulder, a small entourage of 12 or so guards, and her ever-present lieutenant, the tall black-haired troll called Tayo. Apari's white hair had been streaked with mud to hide her identity. None of the trolls wore the distinctive white and black robes of the insurrection, but rather nondescript rags and bits of armor. Only Apari and her bodyguard Tayo broke away to speak with them. The troll witch leaned her weight onto her good leg and pressed her palm to her heart. "Greetings, Pale Rider."
"At last," Nathanos replied shortly. "I realize it must have been difficult given your limitations, but next time I expect promptness."
Her eyes flashed.
"I've no limitations ya need worry about, Pale Rider."
"Indeed. At least you have understood our need for secrecy. We cannot risk venturing further inland. If Zandalari loyalists lay eyes on us, then our plans are forfeit."
The witch waved away his words impatiently.
"Have ya brought our payment?"
"You are hardly in a position to make demands," Nathanos snorted. "But I am eager to be out of this swamp."
He twisted at the hip and gestured Ranger Vizerin forward. The dark-haired ranger brought forward a small enameled chest, silently placing it on the neutral ground between the trolls and Blightcaller. Aboard the ship, Sierra had seen them preparing the payment, a collection of gems, jewelry, beautifully hammered metal necklace plates, small flagons of rare spirits and daggers. It struck Sierra as slightly excessive given their dwindling resources, but Nathanos had made clear that this was the price of a successful mission.
Soon, he had assured her aboard the Banshee's whale not an hour earlier. Where we will be going, none of these trifles will matter at all.
Sierra slapped at another swarm of insects buzzing around her head, watching as the witch's bodyguard knelt and flicked open the chest with one finger. No smile, no thanks for their generosity, no reaction at all. Sierra simmered, looking to Nathanos, who revealed as little as the black-haired troll.
"This is not what I want," Apari shook her head, sneering. "This is not what we agreed upon."
Clearing his throat, Nathanos calmly signaled for Vizerin to return. She did, and with equal serenity, picked up the chest and returned to her sisters behind them.
"Insulting," Sierra murmured.
Perhaps she should not have. At once the witch fixed her piercing turquoise eyes upon Sierra. An instant later, Sierra felt a sensation like 1,000 spiders skittering down her back. She shivered, but refused to tear her gaze away. Just a witch's trick, she told herself. Nothing more.
Now, Nathanos intervened. This is just a simple misunderstanding. What would you have from us instead?
Apari grinned, showing a set of yellow teeth sharpened to points, the ends blackened by the foul, strong spirits the Zandalari distilled in charred vats. She hobbled forward, looking Nathanos up and down, as if he were a prize cut of meat. Whatever came next, Sierra mused, would not make him happy.
"Ya messenger said ya want to kill Aloha,"
Apari nodded. Her eyes lit up, the idea clearly exciting her.
"Ya want to kill Bonsandi, but ya can't. Not without us. 'Tis no easy thing what ya ask. He must be weakened first. Believers and tribute keep him strong, but without faithful followers he be vulnerable. His shrines be protected by powerful magic. The tribute I need from ya will dispel that magic."
Nathanos hurried her along, at last reaching a state of visible impatience.
"Go on."
"It will require something precious," she continued, pointing to Vizerin and the chest. She flapped her hand and shrugged. "That might be precious to some, but not to you. Ya must give up something painful, something irreplaceable."
"What we offer should be more than sufficient."
Nathanos stood firm.
"You are not in a position to bargain."
The witch was stunningly bold. Sierra could give her that. With a theatrical sigh, the troll witch began to turn around, avoiding her bad leg and refusing help from her bodyguard as she began rounding up the members of the widow's bite. For a moment, Sierra remained certain it was just a bluff. But no, the trolls regrouped and slowly disappeared back into the dense foliage of the swamp.
A moment.
The trolls paused, looking to their leader. Apari waited, only offering a glance over her right shoulder. Before Nathanos could relent and submit to their demands, Sierra took him by the elbow, lowering her voice and tilting her head toward him.
"Wait."
But he was already pulling a chain out from under his heavy black coat. A green and gold badge, warped and faded with time, hung from the tarnished necklace. An officer's badge? A remnant from a war long since forgotten? Sierra couldn't say. Nathanos and Sylvanas had once served Silvermoon, he so tactically gifted that he had been raised to the rank of Ranger Lord in the Farstriders, an achievement no other human had managed. The Dark Lady herself had been the one to give the promotion. The Dark Ranger serving Sylvanas had told the tale many times at sea. It seemed to be a favorite. Was this the badge recognizing as much? Though his eyes always pulsed with the same steady crimson glow, Sierra saw that dim for a moment, fading just like the old etched memento.
"What are you doing?" Sierra whispered. "We cannot simply give in to every demand and roll over like trained dogs. They will think you weak."
At that, Nathanos curled his lip, eyes now as hot and bright as his flaring rage. He seemed to collect himself, breathing hard. His strength, it seemed, was not to be questioned. Sierra nearly recoiled. But he only pushed the hair back off his forehead, his gaze burning into her with the same furious intensity.
"You will learn the value of silence, or I will teach it to you."
That seemed to satisfy his fury, and when he looked at her again, it was as if she were no more than a pustule on his foot, something he loathed to notice but must. Sierra stewed in indignant silence as he pulled at the chain around his neck, breaking it, before closing the gap between them and the troll witch, holding out the badge for her to take. Apari might have been severely injured, but she moved swiftly then, her arm but a blur as she tried to snatch the necklace from his palm. Nathanos, however, was ready for her, and quickly trapped her hand there before she could take the payment.
"This is no trinket, witch. If you fail to destroy the lowest shrines, as you have promised, then there will be severe consequences. You may have conjured a few clouds off the coast, but payment this dear demands results."
Sierra grinned. That was the blight caller she knew. While the witch threw back her head and laughed, Sierra noticed a shadow moving just behind Apari and her bodyguard. Had that always been there? Sierra moved her hand to her side, tucking her fingers around a dagger, preparing to strike. The thing suddenly propelled itself up into the air, and then flopped back down, landing in a puddle with a plop. Sierra smirked. Just a frog. It waited for another moment before taking another graceless leap.
"This?"
Apari nodded, a serene smile concealing her sharpened teeth. Even her tusks were yellowed and muddy, but she seemed strangely beautiful in that moment, almost angelic, as if by touching the necklace she had been imbued with a new bloom.
"This is what the spell requires. There be power of longing in it, of pain. It will do, Pale Rider. It will do. We assault the first shrine tonight. Bwonsamdi's effigies will burn, and every loss hastens his final hour."
She turned to her bodyguard with a cackle, showing her the badge and necklace.
"What was that?"
Sierra asked, following Nathanos as he rounded up the Dark Rangers and headed for their dinghy. He could threaten to teach her the value of silence all he wanted. She was not going to stop speaking her mind. His shoulders were slumped forward, as if he had suffered a defeat.
"It doesn't matter now."
"It belonged to her, didn't it?"
Nathanos stopped and sneered, adjusting the quiver buckled across his chest.
"Remind me when this is over to drown the witch in this bog."
A rustling in the swampy undergrowth made them both freeze, and all eyes fell on the tumbled shrub in the muck, not far from Apari's feet. "Assassin!" one of her followers shouted. Sierra drew her blade, the rangers knocked arrows, Nathanos reached for his immense carved longbow. Then a single spear soared across the reeds and into the bush, loosed by Tayo with perfect, deadly aim. She stalked over to the spear and tore it out of the undergrowth. A fat, wet toad hung limp from the sharp end.
"Kragwa the Huge inhabits these swamps, and he be sympathetic to the traitor queen,"
Tayo spat, lifting up the skewered frog for all to see.
"His little spies are everywhere. Could be this one is just a toad. Could be he hopping away to make mischief for us.
She snickered and licked her muddied lips.
Either way, lunch.
Chapter 14. Orgrimmar. Thrall pushed away the platter of steaming roast meat in front of him, losing his appetite the moment Yuka arrived at his table. Already he had received word from Zakan in Zandalar that the assassins who had come after Queen Talanji at the council feast had struck again. They were organized enough to have taken a name, the Widow's Bite, and they had managed to wound several guards at the palace before kidnapping 2 civilians. The message from Zakan lay curled next to his untouched plate of food. He had taken a small residence in the Valley of Spirits, little more than a lodge to keep his belongings and a bed. The other council members had agreed to more luxurious accommodations, but Thrall preferred the modest house. A larger home would simply amplify the emptiness, the absence of his wife, Agra, and his children, Durak and little Rez. No, a simple hut would do until his family could join him, or the Horde no longer needed him.
Not going to eat that?
Yuka leaned against his carved shaman staff, twirling his grey beard thoughtfully.
Have you come to steal my supper or do your job, Yuka?
The shaman smiled, but it didn't reach the wrinkles at his eyes.
Old friend, your missive reached Nordrassil, and I carry with me the reply. The Night Warrior bids you come on one condition.
Thrall shifted, even less hungry than before.
And spit it out. She says you must bring what is owed.
Frowning, Thrall scratched his chin.
What else did she say? Nothing.
Yuka shrugged and reached for the haunch of boar growing cold on the table, tearing off a piece of charred skin and eating it.
She claimed that you would know what it meant.
I see.
And how does she seem?
Emboldened by Thrall's disinterest, Yuka tore off a larger piece of boar meat.
Her rage has not lessened, if that is what you mean.
Of course not. Were it me, my rage would simmer for 1,000 years.
Very well. I can linger here no longer, waiting for messengers and quelling council's squabbles.
He sighed.
And this will only cause another one.
Thrall pushed himself up from the table, lumbering over to the door.
Boy,
he called. The head of a skinny orc page appeared, shoving aside the leather curtain protecting the doorway.
Run to the hold, quick as you can. Summon Kalia Menethil and Bane Bloodhoof. We depart for Nordrassil before sundown.
Right away!
The boy vanished, and Thrall crossed to the large, ancient chest of his belongings, next to his spare bed. He fished out a clean leather harness and a woven red cloak, one Agra had made while teaching their children to weave. A subtle design of yellow and darker crimson ran along the border, and Thrall traced it with his fingers. Home. He shrugged on the harness and draped the cloak around his shoulders, while Yuka rubbed his chin.
The undead woman and the High Chieftain. Are you certain that's wise? Will they not both remind her of the Banshee Queen in their own ways?
Bane despises Sylvanas, and the feeling is mutual, Thrall replied, leaving the hut with the shaman trailing close behind. It was well known that Sylvanas Windrunner considered Bane a soft-hearted liability, even before he sought to overthrow her. Her hatred of the Torrens struck Thrall as a ringing endorsement, and now that he had come to know Bane better and witnessed his devotion to the Earth Mother and to the spirits, his respect for the chieftain only grew. Sunlight dampened by a haze of dust roasted the city, and Thrall found himself longing for the cool, shaded pools dotting the land on his farm in Nagrand. He could almost hear the laughter of his children splashing in the water.
And the woman?
Yuka asked.
Kalia Menethil wishes to bridge the divide between the Forsaken and the Kaldarai that have recently found themselves raised into undeath. I see no harm in it.
They stood side by side, the old shaman leaning heavily on his staff, while Thrall surveyed the warren of street under the shaman's quarter, packed with shops and forges. Anvils ringing day and night as blacksmiths tried to replenish the deficit left by the blood war. Yuka cringed at his words.
You disagree?
Thrall's eyes followed the page, Gunk, as he wound his way through the mundane chaos of the commerce below.
It would be better if you came alone. Half the council is already convinced that I will be ambushed in Nordrassil. Some small concessions must be made,
Thrall said. At last Gunk vanished, bare little feet flying out of sight, and well on his way to the Valley of Strength.
Go back inside and finish the rest of my supper if it bothers you so.
At that, Yuka barked with mirth.
Ha! Earthbinder, to go without me would indeed be your downfall. I have negotiated safe passage with the druids protecting the World Tree. I am to escort you and your chosen companions.
Thrall flinched at the old title. It did not fit him any more.
Well, I feel safer already.
Yuka ignored the jab.
Tiala assured me that passage to the World Tree would remain safely open for us. I am to guide you there and then to Tyranda's location. After that, you're on your own.
You must bring what is owed. Thrall was no fool. Surely Tyrande Whisperwind and Malfurion Stormrage desired some gesture, some remuneration for the war crimes visited upon Teldrassil. Even in Nagrand, even cut off from his connection to the powers of a shaman, he had felt the moment the world shifted and the wrath of Sylvanas Windrunner set the Kaldorei capital ablaze. It was quiet, it was distant, but he heard a collective cry, and for a brief, terrifying moment, he tasted smoke on the air where none had been before.
It was as if
1,000 voices had cried out and were suddenly silenced.
Green Jesus is also Green Jedi.
What did he owe? How did he answer that? He had not been part of the Horde War that led to the atrocity, and that perhaps was why Tyrande and Malfurion were willing to meet with him at all. Innocence in one specific crime felt like a weak shield, but perhaps he had more. He gazed over the raised plateaus and flying banners of Orgrimmar, and imagined it aflame, imagined the city that had been the source of so much life and joy and war and pain, reduced to smoldering rubble. What would he want if such a thing were to happen? What would he need? What possible balm could soothe a wound so impossibly deep? They exchanged mounts at Valormock, leaving behind their long-maned windriders for 4 saddled and restless hippogriffs, their feathers a brilliant rainbow of blue, purple, and green. Fortunately, the largest of the beasts was able to accommodate Bane's considerable heft. Thrall spent the exhausting ride in subdued contemplation, hardly noticing the open scar of the strip mines outside Orgrimmar, and then the far more placid view of the South Fury River. The burnished trees of Azshara diminished into just a smear of blood across the land as their hippogriffs lifted them higher, higher, following the path of a churning waterfall until at last Mount Hyjal stretched itself in behind the evening mist. The skies darkened to a striking imperial amethyst, and the first glimpse of the World Tree came, roots gripping the mountainside like gnarled hands. "Oh," he heard Kalia Menethil say softly to his right. "Oh, but it is beautiful."
"Nordrassil," Bane Bloodhoof added, echoing her delight. "The crown of the heavens. What a gift! To walk in the shade of a world tree."
"Look!" Kalia pointed at a pair of playful fairy dragons chasing each other across the surface of the lake below Nordrassil. They flew in a spiral, then dashed back toward the hills and the clearing where Thrall, Kalia, Bane, and Yuka made their descent. The dragons passed within inches of Kalia, their purple and pink wings ruffling her hair. They dismounted, safe as Yuka had promised. The hippogriffs were wrangled and taken away while they waited in the almost oppressive calm.
"The light here is so different. The way it strikes the leaves," Kalia murmured, gazing up at the world tree, its top unseeable in the clouds by even the keenest eyes. "And the flowers! Have you ever seen blossoms of truer blue?"
"By my father's spirit, it is truly a blessing from the Earth Mother."
Bane knelt, the beads adorning his horns and armor twinkling as he admired one of the flowers, inhaling its fragrance. Thrall watched the gloom of night crawl toward them, encroaching on the clearing, stone pillars topped with bright azure flames, the only wards against the darkness. For all the fresh air and pretty flowers, Thrall couldn't allow himself to be at ease.
"There is a pall over this place,"
he said softly. Under the eaves of the inn, nestled against the roots of the tree, a Hyjal warden, cloaked in the brown and green sigil of Nordrassil, kept vigil. Only Yuka heard him.
"We should move quickly. Come."
The shaman led them, skirting the grey timbered inn and taking them down a shallow slope to the banks of the crystal-clear lake. With a tap of his staff against the damp earth, the water ahead of them turned sturdy enough to hold them all. Yuka pressed on as swiftly as aged legs would carry him.
"Take care with your words,"
Thrall warned Bane and Kalia.
"Perhaps it is better now to listen,"
Bane replied with a solemn nod.
"Chatter will not help heal old wounds." "Yes, you sense the darkness that hangs over this place."
"Morning," Kalia spoke gently, her footfalls as delicate as raindrops on the watery path.
"I did not at first realize. The beauty of the world tree is overwhelming, but Thrall is right. This is a place in mourning. We are trespassing on their grief."
Thrall nodded, heartened that they both understood the gravity of the situation. He had chosen his companions wisely.
"I would not have come at all but that the spirit realm is fractured, and our shaman cannot find a cause. That is too dire to ignore,"
Thrall said, reiterating an argument he had made before the council when justifying this very journey to Nordrassil. On the other side of the lake, another hill rose, this one crowned with 3 silver tents, the poles intricately carved with leaves and painted moons. Thick blankets and furs were spread before the tents, along with a low, cushioned bench, the arms carved into owls. Seated beneath the bench, a night elf girl plucked dolefully at a lute. Thrall hardly noticed the somber music, gripped instead by the 2 regal figures seated on the owl bench. As they neared, one of the figures stood, observing them, but refusing to bow or give any respectful sign of recognition. Archdruid Malfurion Stormrage made an imposing impression, tall and strong as time-worn timbers, the antlers of a stag growing from his head, feathers sprouting from his arms, and an emerald beard longer and finer than Yuka's hanging from his chin. And where Malfurion embodied the forest and its creatures, his wife, Tyrande Whisperwind, was a sublime manifestation of Elune, the goddess of the moon. Her white enameled armor, chased with silver, might have been woven from starlight itself. 2 even turquoise braids framed her face, the clean loveliness of her garb and hair making the blackened pits of her eyes all the more unsettling. Malfurion and Tyrande were not alone, and Thrall was surprised to find both Maiev Shadowsong and Chandra's Feathermoon join them. The two night elves had been in whispered conversation behind the bower, but grew silent at the horde's approach. Maev's cold steel helmet, winged and sharp, stood in unsettling contrast to the harmonious natural beauty all around them. Only her emerald green cloak, trimmed in cloud-soft fur, blended into their serene surroundings. Chandra's Feathermoon had come as armed and armored as her companions, a fall of dark blue hair spilling from the top of her leather helmet, her eyes hidden, though he hardly needed to see them to know they were unfriendly. Yuka stopped them several feet from the edge of the carpets, and Thrall stood shoulder to shoulder with him. Nearly 2 heads shorter than Thrall, Kalia waited beside the orc, baying to her left. Expecting a chilly reception, Thrall bowed deeply, relieved to find that his council counterparts did the same. As promised, Yuka also demonstrated his respect for the Kaldorei leadership. Thrall, son of Duratan, High Chieftain of the Tauren, Bane Bloodhoof, and Kalia Menethil, Princess of Lordaeron and Counselor of the Horde Forsaken. They have come to discuss the disturbances noted by the Shaman of the Earthen Ring and the Moonglade Druids. Tyrande merely tapped the musician on the shoulder. The girl strummed one last time and then grew still. The insect night song of the glade began, though it did little to assuage the awkward silence. Thrall kept his attention on Tyrande, as she had locked her eyes on him, and did not look away.
Thank you for agreeing to this meeting, Thrall began, his voice unexpectedly ragged. He cleared his throat and pressed on. Yuka and others feel a sinister interference in the spirit realm. Our dead are not passing on as they should, and they are heedless of the shaman attempting to guide them.
Nothing. None of them so much as blinked, though it was hard to say with Maiev and Chandris wearing their helmets. He decided it was a safe bet.
Yuka tells me your priestesses have made similar discoveries,
Thrall continued, growing a little angry. His cheeks burned with the indignity of their reception. In different days, younger days, he would not have abided the insult.
We have come seeking answers. Will you speak with us?
Nothing. Frosty, rigid silence. At his side, Kalia shifted nervously. Thrall collected himself before saying something rash. He looked into Tyrande's eyes once more, into the hypnotizing aura of darkness in the never-cool embers of her eyes. That moment in the Grand returned to him when he tasted smoke and sensed a far-off pain. That pain was not so far off for her. It was constant, and as potent as the day Teldrassil burned. They had once stood together, he, Tyrande, and Malfurion. All 3 of them defending Nordrassil. That tree they had managed to save, but now the crime of its sister burning must be answered. They had even witnessed his marriage to his wife, Agra, there in the shade of Nordrassil's venerable branches, though that seemed many lifetimes ago. Perhaps Tyrande's rage had obliterated those memories altogether.
I brought what you wanted, what is owed,
Thrall said, and at last he saw a spark of life in her eyes.
I bring you the sincere apology of the Horde. We are not a single voice now spoken through the mouth of a war chief, but a whole host of voices. We have formed a council, so that never again will one take power and abuse it as Sylvanas did, as Sylvanas used that power to slaughter your people.
He could swear the moon above glowed brighter, as if the mere mention of the Banshee's queen's name had ignited its anger.
Kalia Menethil has come. She stands as an example of how we hope to change,
Thrall soldiered on. Kalia nodded, but mercifully kept silent.
Lillian Voss now speaks for the Forsaken. Both women seek to reforge themselves anew, free of Sylvanas, free of her poisonous influence. Those who are sympathetic to the traitor have been exiled, her loyalists torn out by the roots. Bane Bloodhoof even sought to overthrow Sylvanas and remove her as war chief. It is only a shame that he did not do it sooner, and that more did not listen.
Was he speaking to a wall? Would nothing move Tyrande? Even Malfurion gave him the smallest nod of understanding, perhaps only indicating that he was listening. To his surprise, Chandris Feathermoon removed her helmet, revealing the red tattoos and startling white eyes beneath.
You will understand our hesitation, Thrall. Even promises made by your own allies have been broken. I would hear more of what you have come to say, but only because I crave justice as dearly as I crave healing for our people.
Maiev scoffed.
Have a care, Chandris. Listen to his honeyed words at your peril. Believe him at your peril. Join the Horde to hunt Sylvanas at your peril. For once the deed is done, you will again find their daggers at your back.
At that, Tyrande almost smiled. Chandris's wispy brows met in frustration.
I believe justice is action, Maiev. I have told you as much before. Whose action?
Maiev demanded, her sharp voice shattering the peace of the glade.
The Horde's? Whose action? What justice? For I will not be content with only Sylvanas Windrunner receiving her due. She was not alone when Teldrassil burned.
Bane was imprisoned for opposing Sylvanas, Thrall reminded them. Not all of the Horde stood with her that day.
And yet she spoke for your side, acted for your side,
Maiev shot back.
The war chief is the voice of the Horde, the hand of the Horde, but now you have scattered yourselves to a council, dispersing the blame, hiding behind cowardly revisions of a history that will not be forgotten.
She punctuated her anger with a step toward him. Carefully, Chandris drew her back.
I doubt you would like to be held accountable for every mistake and crime committed by the Alliance,
Chandris said in a soothing tone.
Aye,
Bane spoke up.
What is justice to you now? Must Thunderbluff burn? Must Orgrimmar? Will the deaths of our innocents appease you? Do you think pain does not simply bring more pain? High Overlord Sorfang engineered the siege with Sylvanas, though he had no intention of destroying the World Tree, Thrall added. His part cannot be forgotten, but he is now in the grave, put there by his own war chief.
Kalia Menethil glanced between the far taller, larger Bane and Thrall, then softly joined her voices to theirs, quietly but no less firm and sure. These disagreements are a distraction. Our divided sides only keep from apprehending the one who gave the order. Maiev swiveled, watching for Tyrande and Malfurion's reaction, but neither of them replied. In the lingering silence, Chandris ventured her opinion once more.
If we agree to a temporary understanding, she said, obviously picking her words with care, then we do so not to exonerate the Horde entirely. It is but the strategy of a moment. I see no reason why this cannot be. I see many reasons, Maiev muttered.
Tyrande, it seemed, still did not care to speak. The elf began plucking her lute again, but Tyrande slammed her hand down on the owl-shaped arm of the bench, demanding a return to silence. Had the moon grown bigger in the sky? Was it somehow closer? Threatening?
It was not time yet. Malfurion's grave baritone filled the clearing. He leaned down toward his wife, placing a furred, clawed hand on her shoulder. This was folly. Let them go.
Tyrande uncrossed her legs and sat back on the bench, shaking off her husband's hand with a tight grimace. And then all at once, she cared very much to speak.
When you have washed the bodies of 1,000 Kaldorei, burned and broken, when you have fallen to your knees and kissed the feet of 1,000 mourning souls, When you look into their eyes and tell them our horde has changed and they believe you, only then will I accept your apology and treat you as my equal."
Tyranda's voice, edged as steel, pulled the air out of the clearing.
"My brethren here may be willing to entertain your empty pledges of justice and aid, but I know better. I have learned better."
Then she stood, and Thrall worried that the moon might truly fall from the heavens and crush them at Tyranda's command. Her eyes, though black, somehow glowed, Elune's fury blazing colder and brighter along her skin with each word. The glade itself grew grey and almost dead, as if by her will she had sapped the life out of everything around them, withering the trees and obliterating the flowers and grass to dust.
"How many orphans did your horde create that day?"
Tyranda sliced the flat of her hand diagonally across her body.
"Those children will grow. They will wake each morning tasting ash, and one day they will come for you. Oh, they will come for you, and they will make you taste that same ash, and then you will know their justice."
She sat down again, as if winded, light returning to the clearing, and the plants around them were green and vibrant once more.
"Quickly," Yuka muttered, trying to gather them. "We must go. This was a mistake. I should not have brought you here."
Bane and Kalia allowed Yuka to corral them back toward the path of glittering solid water. Thrall remained, only taking slow, careful steps, never showing Tyranda his back. For his trouble, Tyranda directed her final words to him, and only him.
"You will find that justice less sweet than the sorry excuse for punishment you faced. And when this justice comes, there will be no armistice to save you."
Thrall felt Yuka grab him by the arm and yank, but he did not agree with the shaman's assessment. It was important and right that they had come. Thrall had thought he knew what Tyranda wanted, that what was owed was his remorse. But now he realized his error. He easily shook off Yuka's hand and pressed his fist to his chest to prove his sincerity.
"I will bring what is owed, then. I will not bring words or promises. I will bring you the head of Sylvanas Windrunner."
The faintest trace of a smile appeared on Tyranda Whisperwind's face.
"Do it, then, or never seek to speak with me again."
Krazit? The Krazit? I know Krazit! Spooky little fellow liked to gamble in Freehold. Called himself the bishop, 'cause he would get 3 sheets and say, "Oh, lads, I'm a bit slopped," but it just sounded like, "I'm a bishop!"